Yes, I'm Simon, and I work with Matt Jones and Jen Pearson, who are also in Swansea University. And we've been working on this project for the past two and a half years, primarily in developing tools for scaling based in rural emerging markets. So not necessarily the sort of things that we've been talking about today. However, today I am going to cover a sort of sprint through a summary of the sort of technologies that are used in alternative agri-food networks. I appreciate that we are running a long way over time, so I will probably shorten it slightly. But anyway, just a point about the very first talk today. So you can actually get downloadable food, and you can do things like printing stuff on toast. You can print chocolate. Obviously, this is not what we're looking for in this meeting. What I've done in this talk today is basically summarized a lot of the digital technologies that are used. I've gone through research literature and also an awful lot of commercial systems, apps, tools that are used in this space. And hopefully this will be useful to help people understand what is available and also what is lacking and what we as a group can discuss and hopefully maybe build. So the technologies I'll be talking about today, I think, apply to most types of alternative networks, from the very small kind of farmers selling directly to consumers, farm shops, markets, all the way up to like really wide distribution like we heard in the previous talk. What I focused on is the smaller end of the scale, so farm shops, markets, food hubs, ways of organising those. I think these technologies apply to all stages of the supply chain, from production all the way up to consumption. But I'm going to focus on the sort of the retail distribution and processing and things that add value to these the food that is being produced. And what I've done is separated them into 4 separate areas. So I'm going to talk about both the creation, management, the infrastructure, and the scaling technologies that are being used at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight into creation. What I've defined this as is technologies that are used in things like cooperatives and food partnerships, things to encourage people to network and to get more involved in their community locally produced food. A lot of this is the use of the word local as kind of persuasion and encouraging people to buy and to use local products. And throughout this talk, there are a lot of different technologies, varying from very simple websites. They're the most obvious way to use digital technologies to communicate with consumers. And this kind of helps to encourage people to group together for support, group together to discuss local food. Now, this is obviously not a very kind of advanced use of technology. It's more almost like a digital version of a leaflet or a newspaper. So some of the things that people do to try and make more use of technology are to encourage people to kind of sign up to food charters, to sign a pledge that you will buy this local produce and you will use local food. And this kind of helps to create kind of small micro networks of people using local food. There are other ways of encouraging this, such as getting people to actively involve themselves. Like we heard earlier, getting yourself involved in a food network is a good way of kind of encouraging local usage and getting good participation. And there are lots of these, lots of ways of getting apprenticeships, getting jobs on farms, and kind of helping people support each other in starting up, creating alternative food networks. This is probably the most basic use of technology, like I said. Things like collections of documents even count as use of technology here. And finally, there are lots of ways of using online groups to kind of collectively share ways of using local food, like recipes and things like this. So what I'm trying to say here is that in the creation of alternative food networks, I think there is fairly little use of technology beyond just, here's a website, let's get together and make a food network. The next area of technology that I'd like to talk about is the management of alternative food networks. So traditionally, or probably still, a lot of the management of small enterprises just done using a collection of spreadsheets. And you store who your suppliers are, who your producers are, you do a lot of manual work in kind of bringing all this together and organising what you're doing. There are lots of ways of integrating these services together that have sprung up over the last few years. There are also many mobile apps that help to encourage and support producers in doing this sort of procedure. One of the things here is that they're often aimed at much larger enterprises. So a bit like we discussed about the differences between the UK and the US, it's very difficult perhaps to find products that are aimed at very local food networks. So a few examples of these, things like, this is called Ag Squared, a software package that helps farms plan and manage and kind of monitor anything that they're doing, from planting the seeds through to selling, through to organising suppliers and distributors, analysing their costs, the revenue, and all this sort of process. And there are many, many alternatives in this area. AgTrax, FarmWorks, LandMagic, many, many different products. But these are mainly aimed at larger farms, so more local food networks, I think, would probably struggle to access or find a good return on the monthly fee that these sort of tools tend to charge. If we look at mobile apps, well, there's a more attractive sort of thing here. So if you are a rural farmer and you want to find out what is a particular disease that your crops have got, there are lots of apps like this one here called Check It, which basically let you compare a photo of a typical disease and a description with what you're seeing in the field. There are also things for tracking, say, what you've planted in particular fields, and also combining both of these two apps together. Most of these are very targeted, and actually if you look at the downloads they have, they're very kind of small and focused. So I'm not sure that these are attracting the numbers of users that would actually be worthwhile. To go to look at something that is clearly very widely used, it's quite helpful to go and look at emerging markets, where there are many, many systems that help coordinate farmers and suppliers and producers to buy and sell their produce online. So, for example, commodity exchanges for all sorts of produce are incredibly widely used, and support networks, such as this one here. The idea here is basically an online forum that is used in any sort of context, really, where you post questions and find answers to all the problems that you're having with your crops. If you look more at research in this area, kind of focused on smaller farmers, part of our project team has actually been thinking about how you can take the benefits of this integrated network of technologies that help you manage your farm, your suppliers, your produce, and actually, but also meet local constraints. So this, I'm not sure how well you can actually see the stuff on this slide, but essentially our partners in IIT Bombay have been working on a system which supports rural apricot farmers through the whole process of selling, coordinating with intermediaries, and planning the entire process. And this has several different elements, from things that are particularly appropriate to local farmers, a telephone-based interface rather than a web-based interface, because they don't necessarily have a web connection. And we've also done some work in this area as well. So I have a short video here, which you probably can't hear, so that's not particularly good. Anyway, so our work in this area, rather than trying to support management of a network, what we tried to do was support usage of the existing tools that people are using to help manage their business. So what's going on here is that someone is calling a farming information hotline, and they call up and basically listen to the sorts of questions that you would find on online forums. They haven't got an internet connection, so they're using a phone instead. But you can't do the sort of sharing or connection that you can do online over this phone network. So we made a way where you hold two phones together to share the information. Obviously this is not incredibly relevant in the context here, but what I'm trying to say is that there are other ways of using technologies that are already out there to improve the way that people can coordinate together. Okay, so the next area I'd like to talk about is infrastructure, and this kind of overlaps with the previous. But this is more support for things like supply chains and distribution and transparency and provenance. There's been a lot of focus about, especially in the talks we've seen, how we can show that what you're eating is local. You can track all the stages that it's been through, and right back to the farmer. So this is what I kind of mean here. And again, there are various services for managing this sort of network. A lot of things try and help you map and understand where all your suppliers are located. And this is also used for kind of focusing on building up local networks and letting people understand where their food is from. If we go through these, and these are a very small selection of the things that you can find in this space, it's obvious that there is a huge number of this sort of tool. All these sites, all these tools are competing. So as a consumer, it's very difficult to pick which one you might use. As a supplier, it's very difficult to pick which one you might want to supply to. Now, an obvious solution is something like what Kathy presented, where you aggregate the aggregators. But I wonder, where does this just become a supermarket? What's the difference between this sort of thing and Tesco? Or how do you define a local food producer when you have all of this? And I think this is one particular gap in this market. There is a clear way for technology to help here. So one solution to this kind of glut of networks is some way of letting people track where their food has come from, the provenance that I mentioned. So things like showing a simple map of where your jar of honey has come from is quite rarely used. Other ways, such as harvest mark, which is shown here, are things where you key in the barcode that you find on your product and get directed to a page where you can view a profile of a farmer. And this is actually quite a popular idea. So, for example, you might scan a QR code that is on a product and go and find out when it was grown, where it was grown, and connect with this farmer, maybe view videos that they've created or look at their Twitter profile. And this is actually used not just for agriculture, but lots of things in research as well have tried to use codes on objects to connect people all the way back through the supply chain to the people who actually created them. In our work, we've actually been thinking about, well, why add more codes to things that already have barcodes? Why don't you existing products and allow people to post their own messages on there. So this is an app that we created where you scan any product, and essentially that barcode becomes an online forum about that product. Now this is maybe not particularly relevant for very local produce where, as we heard, the costs of getting a barcode are substantial, but this is one option. The final things I'd like to talk about is how digital technologies are used for scaling enterprises. So things like reaching new markets, promotion, and kind of communities getting in contact with their customers. And the aims here are kind of obviously increasing the demand so you can increase the production and grow the network. And I know some of the people who've made these products are here today, so things like food trade aims to connect suppliers to buyers. But again, in this area we have the same problem where there are lots of different networks trying to do this. So I'm sure in somewhere like London, food trade can help you find lots of suppliers, whereas we're from Swansea, and if I search for the suggestions here, like apples or fish, I get absolutely no suppliers. So obviously this is a network problem that it is very prevalent. And there's the same thing with like farm crop, where the aim is to start food hubs and get local suppliers together using technology to coordinate people into dropping off and collecting from hubs. Again, things like the lot of other technology in this area contribute to difficulty in finding local things. And again, there are lots of things in this area. So perhaps one way of doing this better, or not necessarily better, but more appropriately sometimes, is just to connect directly with consumers. If I follow someone on a social media network and find out about their local or fish or whatever the product is, at least in my perspective, I think that gives a more personal connection with the actual supplier, and rather than having to pick a food hub or a network that coordinates these suppliers, it might be easier to go directly to these producers. And again, there are lots and lots of examples in this area. So those are two kind of extremes of ways of coordinating people. One other way is maybe to do things like this example. FYI, Breccon's a small town in Wales where lots of local businesses have come together to create very small profiles about their business in that town. And this is maybe a more easier way of making food networks where you know that everything is in that particular place, and rather than going to a national network, a local network might provide an easier way to find local food. And there's actually been a similar effort within this project. So Nottinghamshire, the team, are working on a way of, as well as networking local providers together, simplifying the sorts of services that they might already be using, like social media and making websites, branding and identity. As we discussed earlier, this is a lot of work for a small enterprise. You'd have to put out a lot of time to manage all these services. So maybe there are opportunities here to improve that process. Finally, in the scaling section of this, there are many ways of promoting existing markets and gatherings via websites and apps. This is a local Swansea market where there is no need for anything more complex than a very simple trade profile, what they sell, what you can find when you next go visit the market. And similarly, there are apps for markets all over the world which try and support this sort of local discovery of what is going on in your area. There are some things in this area that are perhaps more difficult to solve than just finding buyers. If you browse a local market, you have to go around, probably enjoy chatting to all the individual suppliers, but then have to sort out paying and collection and carrying things around. So one of the things we've thought about in this area is whether you could simplify the actual ordering from a market of this type. So what we've done here is to produce small flyers where you tick a box for what you would actually like to purchase, and then take a photo of what you've ticked. And that will automatically send off an order to this supplier. So this is pretty much it for the technology I'd like to cover. Now I realise I've kind of run through a vast amount of different technologies. Hopefully I've given you a summary of the huge range of things that you can do. It's obviously impossible to cover all digital technologies in all alternative agri-food networks. I guess one of the key points I'd like to make is that there is so much duplication and so many competing networks that as a consumer it's incredibly difficult to find what you are looking for. And this is something that Kathy is trying to solve, I suppose. As a supplier, it's very difficult to know where you would like to choose to supply your food to. If you choose a network that is not particularly attractive to customers, then you're not going to be able to actually ship your produce. So yeah, in general, I think some sort of consolidation would vastly improve the technology in this area. There are so many versions of the same ideas. One thing I probably didn't highlight enough is that most of these systems are aimed at larger enterprises. The vast majority of the apps that I covered and the business management systems provide so many things that are not required for smaller enterprises, and paying a monthly fee for the entire package is probably very unattractive for a very small enterprise and not worth their while. So I think there are gaps in that area too. And finally, I know I showed very few research systems, but I think there are opportunities to really take an advantage of the technology that is available. A lot of the systems that are out there are basically digital versions of a newsletter or a newspaper. And that's great where that helps people discover the new local produce, but I think there are opportunities to go beyond. And with that, I'll finish.